You're listening to the Dead Padawans Society, a science fiction and fantasy podcast celebrating the ideas, mythologies, and truths in iconic works of sci-fi. I'm your host, Brett Inman, joined by my friend...
Nick Dennis.
Hey, Nick, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing great.
It's so nice to talk to you through and have audio. Audio is so nice.
Audio is very, very nice.
Rather than having to just read everything.
It would be hard for us to have a silent podcast. It would be really hard for us to be podcasters before the talkies came along. This podcast is a talkie.
That would be a weird and funny experiment if somebody did a podcast that was just open air, like for 2 hours, and then it comes with like a downloadable PDF of
the intertitles
of the content that's in there. That would be great.
Yeah, it's just a music track is all it is. Just
there
a
bouncy
music track.
There you go. Of course, you have to have the score in there. Yeah. Yeah, so we're talking about Metropolis today, the silent film from 1927.
What'd you think of it?
This was the first time I'd ever seen it. I'd obviously have known about it.
You approached me whenever we decided to do this podcast saying like, hey, we're both sci-fi fans. How can you have said that and not have seen Metropolis?
It's one of those things that has always been there, and it's one of those things that it's like, yeah, I'll get around to it. You know, oh yeah, it's iconic. Sure, I'll of course I'll watch it at some point. I mean, it just got kicked down the road over and over and over again. And you just kind of have to be in the mood for a silent film.
That's true.
To be up for that. I mean, being in the mood for watching like a foreign film with subtitles or anything with subtitles, you have to be like, yeah, I'm okay to do that tonight. But a silent film is just strictly that. And so you have to really be in the mood.
Yeah. I was trying to watch through this during evenings, and it would put me to sleep consistently. And I love this movie. That's the thing. Like, I actually really, really love this movie. But it's amazing how different a movie is whenever you do have to give it so much attention.
It really is an experience. Anytime I have watched a silent film, which I've watched this, I've watched Nosferatu, and, what's the other one? Oh, Phantom of the Opera. Those are the only three silent films, I think. Oh, no. The Moon.
Voyage to the Moon?
Voyage to the Moon. Yeah, I've seen that one as well.
Yeah, but I was going to judge you if you hadn't seen that one. Of course, the thing is, members of our audience have likely not seen these films, too.
Right. I mean, everyone... If you see a bullet in the eye of a cheesy moon, everyone knows that image. Or the android sitting on a chair with the light rings around it. Everyone knows that. But so many people, myself included, have not seen Metropolis. It's just one that's there, and you know it's iconic. You know it has a lot of film significance. But once again, you have to be in the right place to go into that. But I will say, in watching this one, because I watched it 2 nights ago, I was keyed in. There wasn't a time where I was like, okay, what's next? You know, just waiting. I was definitely judging it at points, but altogether, I was eager for the next scene. I was eager for what was going to happen, and for the next text to come up to know where is this conversation going. It's so funny when because there's plenty of stuff in silent films that you don't get what they're saying. They'll have conversations that's never text, and so you're wondering. And for the most part in this movie, it's actually done pretty well. That stuff isn't necessary. But that time you are focused on what is this conversation, what is the dialogue here, and then they just give you what you need.
There are times in silent films too where the audience is meant to be able to even read the lips of the actor and get a sense of what's going on. And so with this being a foreign language silent film,
there's no way.
Now usually it's just broad statements, but if you ever notice, there would be a time where somebody would be exclaiming something and they wouldn't use an intertitle. The assumption is, my audience is going to understand what's being said here.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I didn't.
And so those sometimes, especially in this film, don't communicate because I don't speak German.
Right, true. Well, that's funny because I wasn't even thinking of that. I knew it was a German film, but I wasn't even thinking that these actors are speaking that on set. I was in the times where I was either waiting for text to show up or it wasn't coming, and I didn't know if it would come. I was just focused mainly on their emotion, which is
that's the more important part.
Right, that's what they're trying to convey most in those times, which this film has plenty of emotion.
Really?
They're so over the top.
It was so subdued, though.
There's nothing subtle in this movie.
That's very true.
At all. Absolutely nothing
in very
subtle.
Broad strokes. Well, it's in a film style that's the
right.
German cinema of that time was intentionally being very broad and on the nose and hitting you in the face with things that would have been done more subtly today, I'm sure.
Right. Well, there's a reason why the slapstick genre has its roots in silent film.
Yeah.
Like that's where it came from with Charlie Chaplin. And
yeah, it's hard to tell a joke when you can't say anything. Can
right.
you imagine a joke in intertitles?
Like waiting for that punchline.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, when you read it, you're like, you potentially even put the punchline together before you even get to it, and it's like, oh, yeah, that was what I was expecting. No, thanks for spelling that out for me.
I had long enough to figure out where you were going there. So, yeah, that's why Charlie Chaplin works so much, because so much of it is just movement comedy through what he's doing. Yeah, but this, I did enjoy it.
Good.
I have some critiques and some things that I didn't like about it, and altogether, I think it's a good film. It's I don't see it as a great film. It's great for what it is, and its placement in the beginning of science fiction film, and all the meaning that is tied to it, I think, is rightfully due in there. But yeah, altogether.
Wow. See, I would say that it's a great film. It ranks among the top films of all time for me.
Really?
Yeah.
Just overall? Really?
Yeah, it's a masterpiece that almost bankrupted the studio that produced it.
I think of it as it's a visual masterpiece.
And that's a lot of what I'm whenever I say that.
Yeah.
Film is a visual medium for me. So
that's true. It's definitely a visual masterpiece, and I feel like its themes and how it's conveyed through the imagery is a masterpiece. The story itself is where it falls short for me.
One really ironic thing, this film was rescored in the 80s. A bunch of popular bands at the time.
I saw that on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, the film, in a lot of regards, feels less dated than the music does. Like, the music was so clearly out of its period, but the film, in my opinion, transcends the time that it was made in a lot of ways. Now, there are definitely things that are totally 1927 Germany, but there are a lot of ways where I feel like it is more universal.
So are you saying, do you like the original score or the updated score?
Oh, I like the original score better, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's instrumental, it's orchestra.
Yeah.
I mean, just like George Lucas said, it's timeless.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that updated, whenever you've got 80s pop music has aged more than Fritz Lang's Metropolis.
Right. Okay. Well, yeah.
Are we going to say Lang or Long? Which one do you want to use this episode?
I mean, we're Americans.
So we're going Lang? Okay.
Well, and also his wife.
I just said that, I'm like, ooh, that actually, it's Fritz Lang.
Fritz Lang. Well, and also I was watching a documentary that was made in Germany on this, and so it had subtitles. And his wife's name, I know I'm going to butcher this, Thea von Harbo?
That's pretty good.
Is that it?
Pretty good, yeah.
Okay. That's what it looks like in English to me, is Thea von Harbo, which she wrote the book, and then she adapted it to the screenplay for this, and then was his collaborator on all of his films, I think. At least on a lot of them. That's what it made it sound like in the documentary I watched.
She was a Nazi, though.
What?
So when he fled Germany, she stayed.
No. Are you serious? Did they get divorced? Did they split?
I believe so.
No way.
Yeah.
Her husband is Jewish, and she becomes a Nazi, divorces him, and is like, I'm all about this.
It's actually based on the story that he tells, and there are a lot of people who question some of the stories that he tells, because he's a great storyteller. You can tell in this film, he's a great visual storyteller.
Yeah.
He liked to take moments of his life and really blow them up. And she actually helped him fund his escape from Germany with some jewelry. So she evidently at least supported him, if not.
That's so weird.
Yeah.
So she's a traitor, but not a traitor.
Yeah.
That's so weird and funny, and I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
Wow, she was a Nazi.
Yep.
Well, that's the last time I'm mentioning her.
Okay,
Forget her.
So yeah, production notes, they divorced in 1933.
33.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
The time checks out. Yep.
Wow. That's rough.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, dude. I mean, you're exiled.
He's dead now.
Exiled from your... still, exiled from your country, and you lose your wife. Can you imagine that? Like, yeah, no, I'm not coming with you. I hate your Jewish side now.
I would
What
rather...
is that?
Well, see, my thing would be that it would seem more like as if she was choosing her political party over her husband. So if my wife were to say, I'm sorry, but I'm going to be a libertarian instead of loving you, so goodbye.
Right?
Be like, really? You're that committed to those values that, yeah.
And also, you can sell my necklace to get out of the country.
Yeah, but I
want.
don't hate you, but I'm just not into you right now.
That's messed up. Did they have kids?
I don't know if they had children or not.
Okay, I didn't see anything about that either.
Which I've heard Lang was kind of a monster, so maybe he didn't have children or need them.
He was kind of... Well,
he was a hard man, based on what people have said. Like,
so maybe she didn't actually hate him.
She was not a Nazi at all.
She was just using his Jewishness as a scapegoat.
Excuse. Yeah.
Because she just hated being married to him.
I've got to stay in Germany because I'm a Nazi.
Yeah. Oh, man, I really want to know more about this now. That's crazy. Oh, that's pretty fun. So let's just jump right in, and I'll talk a little bit about the background of this movie if our listeners don't know. This Metropolis is from 1927, German silent film. Fritz Lang, director, screenplay by his wife. It was filmed over 17 months, took 17 months to film, and it cost over 5 million Reichsmarks. So
did you do the conversion for
yes,
how much that is?
That's what I was talking about before. I was like, well, what is that? What is because a Reichsmark, I found out, is not. They've had different currency changes, and I think this one even died before Nazism.
Probably. I mean, that would make
was
sense.
On the rise, and so this one had its own. So I had to go back and find a table for conversion for the years. I found a table of Reichsmarks to dollars for the years that Reichsmarks existed. And the conversion in 1927, when this was released, was 4.2 Reichsmarks to a dollar. Okay. So I then divided 5 million Reichsmarks by 4.2. Yeah. Oh. Got it to what it would be in US dollars in 1927, and then I wanted to do inflation, and so I found a historical inflation site where I plugged in that number and then updated it from, so I did 2017, this many US dollars, to 2018, what is it now? So today, all of this to get to, it costs 17 million US dollars today.
Oh, that's a steal.
Which I was a little disappointed in because, you think about $30 million for a movie today is a cheap
absolutely
movie.
Yeah.
Especially for a sci-fi property, if you're going to do anything with visual effects or anything like that. And so the whole time I was thinking, because everything was saying it was ridiculous. It was one of the films that bankrupted the studio, the UFA studio there in Germany, because they put a ton of money into several silent films of that era. And so I was thinking it was going to be, what is it going to be, like $150 million or something like that?
Nope.
It's 17. But I mean, they were bouncing back from World War I, so they probably didn't have a lot of money to go around in the country at the time. So yeah. So it cost that much. It almost bankrupted UFA Studio along with several other silent films. After it was released and the runtime of it was 2.5 hours, total. And from there, it got cut to pieces, censored. When it was sent all over the world, different countries butchered it and put it. When it came to America, it was only 90 minutes, which blows my mind.
Right? To take an hour out of the movie.
Yeah, an entire hour. And we'll get to more specifics on that when we jump into the discussion. But yeah, people hated it in America. It did not receive good reactions. And, you know, some of that may have been justified based on the content that they were given. But when you think about, this is not the story. When you cut an hour out of a movie, I mean, we see that today with people proclaiming they want the Snyder Justice League cut or the, you know, true cut of this or that. And they have the fan petitions. Yeah. It's because people want to know what was the actual vision.
Yeah, does it? Well, and a lot of times in those cases where people are begging for the longer cut of the film, it's because they get the feeling that the film would make more sense if it had those pieces back in it. I can even the Batman versus Superman. Is that Dawn of Justice? Is that one that was titled? Yeah. If you watch the extended cut of that film, it fixes some of the problems that movie had. So I can definitely see, yeah, if you take a movie that's supposed to be 2.5 hours, you cut it to an hour and a half, that's going to definitely change some things. Structurally, it's going to remove plot points that could help you understand what's going on in the story.
So from here on out, this is your spoiler warning for Metropolis. If you haven't seen it, you can get it on YouTube. Definitely, though, I haven't seen the shorter cut. I've only seen this complete cut, and I don't know a difference, but I would say obviously get this one because the scenes that you can tell were lifted from the Argentina reel like are integral to the
really
plot.
Are. Oh, you completely lose the Thin Man from the film if you don't have those.
Who is creepy. That guy is so creepy. Yeah. He's a perfect villain. Whoever cast him just nailed it because dude is scary just to look at. He doesn't have to do anything and he's horrifying. But yeah, definitely try to get that complete cut and watch it. But jumping right in, we're going to talk about what Metropolis is. Metropolis is the future shining city of tomorrow. Divided sharply between the wealthy city planners and the underground working class, this utopia is built and maintained by the city's mastermind, Joe Fredersen. His privileged son, Freder, however...
Wait, it's a German name, isn't it?
What? How do you say Joe Fredersen?
Yo.
Yo? Oh, is it?
Yeah, because J's are Y's and
Yo, Fredersen.
Yo, Fredersen.
All right. Well, then the city's mastermind, Yo Fredersen. His privileged son is Freder, and he, however, he realizes that his comforts that he enjoys in the city hinges on the repressive labor of those in the city beneath. When he meets a saintly woman named Maria, who represents the struggling masses, he is inspired to become the mediator between his father and the laborers. However, Yo Fredersen hatches a plan against his son to keep the working class in line. He enlists the help of evil scientist Rotwang. I'm saying that wrong.
It's a German name. V's and W's. You got to switch them.
Scientist Rotwang to turn his newly invented android into the uncanny image of Maria. This doppelganger abomination sows dissension, sin, and hate in the hearts of the wealthy and poor alike, becoming the foretold whore of Babylon from the apocalyptic book of Revelation. Freder and Maria race against the time to fight through a city on the brink of doom to redeem both the head and the hands of Metropolis through love. Man, I just butchered all those names.
They're German names. Yeah.
Well,
I had always thought that it was Joe Fredersen, and then I was researching for this episode and realized his name's Yo. It blew my mind.
Well,
it completely changed the film for me.
Well,
you need to go back and watch it now, knowing that his name is Yo, and it completely,
Yo Fredersen. It's funny. Well, halfway through the movie, I realized it wasn't John Fredersen. There's no N there. It's J-O-H.
Well, that's what it looks like. Yeah, I want to say the first time I saw it, that was what I thought at first too.
Right, like, you immediately.
It's just John. Yeah,
your mind immediately adds the N onto.
Yeah, or those people who don't have an H, that's short for Jonathan or something.
Right,
and it's Jon, and you're like
John, and so it looks like it's just an extended N.
Yeah, what's wrong with that end? It's got
It's like,
something
oh
on
no,
top.
it's
You gotta,
oh no, it's Joe. No, it's
Yeah.
not Joe either. It's
Nope.
Yo.
thanks, Germany.
So before we jump into our discussion on this is a very old movie.
Mm-hmm.
1927. It is going to be approaching 100 years old in the near
Yeah,
future.
the next decade. Yeah.
Yeah, which is so crazy to think of film being over 100 years old.
But we're finally to that point because
Yeah.
we are the first generation to experience that.
Yeah,
for film to
absolutely.
be an old medium.
Yeah, yeah. For it to have been ingrained in our culture through the entire 20th century, and we're in a new century. So it's crazy to think about. But so it's an old property, and what happens to old properties? They get remade.
Unless they're black and white silent films, and then nobody remembers them.
I will say though,
Teardrop.
I was looking online and doing some research. This in 2016, this was slated for a reboot by
What?
the showrunner of Mr. Robot. He was attached to it, but nothing has been said since.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, because I was thinking, has there been any? And there's been in 2001 there was an anime called Metropolis or a manga.
Yeah, well, an anime based on a manga, which that's really a weird story. The film mirrors Metropolis, but it was based on this Japanese comic, which took inspiration from allegedly from a single image of the movie. Like the creator, Osamu Tezuka, had only seen one still from Fritz Lang's Metropolis and took that and used it as the inspiration to create this comic book. So those two are basically unrelated except for that image that inspired it.
Which really,
then,
at that
yeah,
point,
yeah.
Can you say, I mean, pretty much you created it from scratch
Oh, yeah,
because
yeah,
everyone
yeah.
has seen a single still from
Metropolis,
Metropolis. So it's not, I mean, that's still a great feat for him to come up with the whole thing
Oh,
based
absolutely,
on that.
yeah. So the anime, which evidently did bring some elements from the film back into it, but it is largely based on the manga.
Okay,
So yeah.
cool.
So yeah, as far as I know, this has not been remade.
Yeah, there's been no remakes or reboots or continuations or anything like that for this. And so I thought it'd be a little fun thing for us to play a little game of
Okay.
we both pitch a reboot or remake
Ooh.
of Metropolis. Yeah.
Oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you
I
have a pitch?
I have I don't know how much of a pitch this is because I don't have like a story thought out, but
let's
just
be
an
fair,
idea.
Though. Let's be fair though. A lot of the movies that I see, it looks like they don't have much of a pitch. Like high concept films don't have pitches. It's
There's
like
not
what
a
if
huge
it's
plot here?
What if it's Jaws, but it's bigger than Jaws?
It's like
The Meg.
yeah, it's like 5 times the size of Jaws.
So I think it's fair to have What concept stands out to you in your
So
pitch it. I'm your exec.
Okay, so this movie, you could argue is very is fantasy, is very fantasy as well as sci-fi, and I actually where sometimes in sci-fi movies you're like, yeah, that's fantasy, that can never happen, that doesn't work, and it can take you out of it. In this movie, it blended together pretty well, and I was all along for it. The whole blending like Catholicism and the idea of the end times into a future city and this robot android, I thought was really interesting, especially with like the 7 deadly sins and the evil Maria android and what she was doing. The most terrifying part of this movie is when she is at the club and doing that dance.
Yeah.
I was sitting there and I've seen a lot of horror movies. Recently, some that just really messed me up. Like I watched Hereditary recently. That movie messed me up. But I sat here and watched that, and I was like, "This is terrifying." Looking, and so I wondered,
especially for the audience of the day.
Well, see, that's the thing. The audience of who was scared out of their seats from a train coming at them, not that long before, having this on the screen, and very just her dancing and gyrating in her face. This
Well, and that juxtaposed against the images of like the men's faces and the superimposition that they do.
with that
Multiple exposures and the eyes.
the eyeballs
yeah.
and everything. I mean, it was almost Lynchian in creepiness.
Yeah, totally.
Like I had flashes to Twin Peaks and Eraserhead and stuff like that of, man, this is some scary imagery. And then she lifts up on the dragon sculpture that has been made, and anytime, and when she's burned at the stake and she just has this horrible witch face, it's terrifying. The actress, I don't know her name offhand, but she kills it. At first, I wasn't, when she's first introduced as, Saintly Maria, and she brings the kids up, and it's just way over the top of her first meet cute with Freder. And I was like, who's this lady? This is a bit much, like their faces and here's your brothers. And I was like, what is this?
It's on the nose. It's very on the nose.
It's on the nose, and I'm like, it's just way over the top. But man, through the movie, I was like, she's great. And she's the switch between her being so pure of a character into being such a horrible, evil character and playing both roles. I was like, man, hats off to you. You can sell it.
I loved, there's a shot that I noticed in rewatching the film, or a cut rather, where Machine Maria is messing with the machines and ruining them, and you immediately cut to the real Maria going into the underground city to rescue the children, and to see the cut between the two of them, and it seemed like different characters. Yeah, she did a fantastic job.
Yeah, it's like you're a completely different character here, which we get some of that today, like doppelgangers and even like android robot versions of somebody getting duplicated. Like we've seen that in media today, and it's great when you can see the nuances. But of course, this is very over the top. But the two extremes work of her being so pure and loving, and then this other being so evil and hateful. And man, it's terrifying. So anyway, my pitch, all that to be said, the Gothic influences on the film, the focus on kind of like the evil and like demonic parts of it. So I was thinking of, if this were to be rebooted, remade today, like what is popular and really working today? And a part of it is we have a lot of good AI stuff right now. I mean, Terminator's kind of gone downhill, but thinking of shows like Westworld and stuff like that, the idea of bringing AI and them having consciousness and dealing with what all that means, Ex Machina, that's popular right now and working right now, done very well. And another thing that came to mind is what is horrifying right now and really working in the Conjuring universe. Like those films and like Insidious and stuff like that have really boomed right now. They're the big horror franchises that people flock to, and they are terrifying because it's dealing with that. And so I was like, what if you took this idea from Metropolis, and I thought, don't make it, my pitch would be, it's not a movie, but it's a mini series.
Okay, see, I'm already thinking I would probably make it a mini series over a movie.
Yeah,
so,
because there's just a lot of there's a lot here, and so to develop characters and motivations, and to see, what I liked the most was the android in this movie, that storyline of what she does, because a part of me wonders, is she still in Rotwang's, I'm still saying that wrong.
It's all good. It's German.
Control. Is she in his control at all times, or has she gone beyond, and she is this manifestation of evil that is in no one's control anymore and is just running amok in the city?
It's hard to say, because that's sort of what he wanted her to do.
Right. It was what he and Fredersen had pushed for her to do. So is it like, is she still under their programming, or is this something else? And so I like that idea of, what if there was something that was programmed to do a purpose, a particular purpose for evil, like doing something evil in the world. But then, anyway, in this miniseries being, the AI going past the control of its creators. But I thought it would be interesting to throw in the aspect of, what if the ghost in the machine is nefarious, and not just a AI bucking against, like, you did the wrong programming and now it sees humanity as a threat, like that's in so many properties of, I have to get rid of humanity because they're a plague on the world or something like that. But it's actually like an evil force inhabiting, because we see that in horror movies now. And I know this is fantastical. I totally get that this is not hard sci-fi, but I think it would be cool because there's things like Annabelle and Chucky, and those are freaky when something that's inanimate has something evil inside of it. And what if you did some sort of like end times thing, and then have like connections like they do in this movie to like the Beast and the Whore of Babylon and prophecy. And then you could also play into it, have like religious connections. You could keep the same characters, even like Maria, you could make into like a nun or something like that, who is very well versed in the scriptures and knows what could come or something like that. And then, I feel like this is ripe for a retelling or a reimagining.
So what would the climax of your story, what would it work towards?
Ooh, that's a good... See, I haven't gotten that far, but it would be... The idea would be they're thinking that this machine is doing what it's supposed to and what they planned it to do. I'm thinking maybe like geopolitical figures trying to use it as a Manchurian candidate kind of thing and putting it in power, and pushing it, but then realizing that it has its own mind and it's playing its own game, and they don't realize it until it's way too far, and then it shifts to, we have to stop it. Which, I mean, is a sci-fi trope that it has been well established, but I feel like throwing the evil angle into it and making it a bit more fantastical would... I feel like that's what's in this film, and so I was like, playing that up, I feel would be pretty interesting. What I would throw away would be probably the whole daddy is over the city and I'm going to bring everybody back together. I'll probably throw that out. Yeah, and go a different direction. So what do you think? What would you do?
If I were going to reboot or update Metropolis, part of it I think you've got to look at, and this happens anytime property's remade. So Lost in Space, you've got to sort of evaluate what are the essential parts of this, how do those speak today, and then how do you change them? How are they different today? So to start off with, Metropolis is a lot about the city itself, and that film created a vision of what future cities would be. To today, even, it's still an influential picture of a city. So what I would want to do is actually start with a groundwork of what based on where we are and the science and technology and things that we have, what is our future city based on our influences, art style, things like that. So I would first get that picture, and that would be the landscape of the entire film is our picture of a future city. So it would not look like Metropolis's future city. It would be a mind-blowing city for us.
Right.
Is what where I would start. And then I think I would actually focus on the conflict in Metropolis, and that would be the next element that I would want to bring forward, because you have this and it's very much out of its time. So you had the Russian Revolution happening, and the workers versus the establishment or people who are in leadership. And so I would want to there are a million of these in our society, and I would, pick one, make it a race thing, make it a gender thing, make it a pay inequality thing. Like, pick one of the places where you have this seeming divide.
Mm-hmm.
And then Maria is definitely, or at least the robot is the next thing that I feel like you have to bring up. You have to update how you're going to do that. And I would want to do one of two things with that. And I think one of them actually would probably be a bad decision and it would get shot down. It would be really interesting because machines aren't big, lumbering, physical things. That would be the thing. Like, if you really took some of the visuals from the original Metropolis, they wouldn't fit today for what our Metropolis would be.
Right. All the machinery under the ground is way too big.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't fit our world at all. And in some ways, I feel like the same is true of Maria, the robot. That look is going to be really out of place in this picture of the future. I think Maria should actually be something even more nefarious, like some kind of sentient program, maybe, that gets into, and you could even, again, manipulating the two sides of a conflict, of an argument. This program is framing people for things, hacking, taking over their public profiles, creating artificial videos that show them doing things. Like, you show a member of one group assaulting a member of the other group, and it's algorithmically generated.
Mm-hmm.
This thing is able to create fake news. And so you use that as a way where you're just increasingly, and so it starts out with everybody is living in relative peace, even though one side may have it worse than the other side. But we have the wonderful, awesome, beautiful future city that over the course gradually just gets completely ripped apart because nobody is really considering what is the truth or being patient with the other side. And so you gradually are working to a conflict between those two forces. And again, I would love for it to be an AI. Now, if you needed to keep a robot, it should be a robot that can change into anybody. So take the idea of it transforming into Maria and just have it be able to do that. You basically have Mystique from the X-Men. Yeah. And so you've got this robot that will randomly, whatever will play to the side that is trying to manipulate, that's what it will turn into, and it will do things to deliberately drive this to a head. And you maybe have your hero who's in the thick of this and is finally able at the end to sort of stop that conflict. So that would probably be the direction that I would go with it. I also, one of the things that I liked, and it's interesting that you keyed in on some of the like religious imagery and stuff, I actually really find, and it's a horrible retelling, like it's not accurate, but the retelling of the Tower of Babel.
Oh,
yeah. As it's presented in, I think that's
not correct. Yeah,
but it's such an interesting. So, the biblical story talks about how the languages were confused, and so people, and this sort of takes that very loosely and in sort of a metaphorical way, and so you might be able to play with that too, like have that story told, and in the same way that it's told in the film, that if people stop listening to one another, and then the same thing being said can mean two completely different things for those two groups. And so you need to be able to speak both languages and connect both. And so, yeah, it would just, I love the idea of building this city that just gets decimated because some force is able to leverage the disparity between two groups. I think that is our political climate today, and so I think that'd be great. And I would probably, like you said, do it over a miniseries. Yeah,
I mean, that's very timely, and people could easily relate to that because we're feeling that right now. I like what you said about making fake videos or making something that's fake and it looks real in order to get immediate outrage, because we saw that with, what was that company that was on Facebook, Cambridge Analytica?
Oh yeah.
brought cameras into a meeting, hidden cameras, and they were just talking about how easy it is for us to manipulate. It doesn't matter if it's true; we just throw it out there, and people are get angry, and that's what you want. And it's so easy to do that. And it also made me think of, I was on Instagram just a second ago trying to find the name because I forgot the name. Have you heard of this fake robot who has who's a model and has an Instagram?
What?
I want to say it's like Chelsea or something like that. But it's crazy. She has done ads for Prada and all these other incredibly huge lifestyle brands because she has a ridiculous following on Instagram. And she's like one of those Instagram models, but she's CG. She's not in any of the pictures that are posted. There's a team behind her that has made her story, made everything about her, and they will even take pictures of celebrities and they will Photoshop her in to be with them.
What?
Yes, and they have a model.
Crazy.
They have a model there who has the actual clothes on, but then they replace her with the CG character. And oh man, I wish I remember the name, but yeah, they're making a ton of money, and she has a ton of followers, and there's a story about how she became self-aware. She's a robot, and she's trying to figure that out. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But people...
Well, and really, that would be the thing that I would throw out, like the vengeance between Rotvang and Yo. To me, that's like the weakest part of it. Like, why would that be the motivation behind somebody throwing their society into chaos? So if you tapped into that idea, that whatever it is that has created the AI Maria, if they're just a company that are using these like spikes in, it would almost be like a serious take on did you watch Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt?
Part of it.
Okay,
yeah.
They're in one of the later seasons. Jenna Maroney, I can't think of her character's name in that show.
I know who you're talking about though. Yeah.
Yeah, she dates one of the owners of the Washington Redskins, and they have this whole Washington Redskins plot, and she convinces all of the owners of the NFL to change their names to even more offensive things so that people will buy the merchandise and burn it. And so, like, if you could, again, that's hilarious, but if you could actually have the architects behind Maria be using this social upheaval to just get more money and more power, and so working both sides just plays in. It's like, okay,
their intention was to make bank, but it goes too far.
Yeah,
that they were just playing on the consumerism and that driving, like people's outrage driving what they do and how they buy, but then it getting out of hand. Yeah. That would be cool, man. Maybe we shouldn't release this, and we should
we should just keep this episode.
We're gonna cut all this out because someone's gonna take these ideas. I would watch this.
Yeah, I would watch either of those.
Yeah, I like it.
I like that you keyed in on the horror elements. I hadn't thought about that in that way, but it would be interesting if the update had a certain element of horror to it.
Well, see, that's what I was thinking of. There's been so many AI things, of AI going wrong, and that's what's in this film. This is kind of the big first one in film, and so I was trying to think of what would be different than what has already been done, and introducing, an inherent evil kind of aspect of it would be fun. Plus, I also had episode 3 still on the brain of where I thought Anakin should have been a seed of evil, but they totally fell on that, and George didn't do it. I'm thinking backwards. I should think forward. Sorry. That's a different episode.
Yeah, I honestly, I'm really glad that you decided to do this game. It was a lot of fun, and it plays into one of the things that stands out to me the most about Metropolis. It is often called, and in doing research for this, everybody talks about this, how it is the most influential sci-fi film ever. And that really tied into something that I've been thinking recently. So I love films. I'm a film enthusiast. I do video production because I was so in love with films that I'm like, hey, this would be a fun job. And I don't make major movies or narrative stuff, but I'm using filmmaking to for my living. And so it's important to me. And as I've thought about films, there are certain academic views that are taken of the filmmaking process and different focuses that people have. And one that has been around for some time, was really popularized by the French, is the auteur theory. The idea that there is a single person for whom you can look to. They are the author of the work. And there are a lot of people who hold to that, and there are a lot of people who also react against it and hate it. But a lot of those people who react against it will then take a literary critical approach. So, well, rather than looking at it that way, let's look at it through a feminist lens. Or rather than looking at it through the auteur theory, let's look at it through whatever the lens is. Mm-hmm. And to me, neither of those are really satisfying. I really like the idea of looking at a person's the author and their influence on the work. The thing about film is it's in my opinion an error to look at it as the work of a single author, because film is this huge collaborative effort. It's this machine put together by all of these different people. And so as I started kind of thinking about that, to go into like looking at it just through a feminist lens or an LGBT lens or a psychoanalytic lens or a post-colonialist lens, whatever a Marxist viewing of a work, those things they can be interesting, but to me they're not really satisfying in that they a lot of times don't necessarily talk about the work so much as they do their theoretical framework. So
going back to the original intent of and just focusing on that and then drawing out from it.
Yeah. And so for me, I want something that focuses on the people who made this work and their influence on it, but for it not just to be like, let's look at one person, but let's look at the entire film. And that led me to wonder, is there some other way that we could analyze films? And then even to go a step further, to recommend films. Because in my opinion, a lot of the methods that we have of sorting movies are really wanting. So like the auteur theory folk might be like, well, you should watch the works of this director. And sometimes that works. And then sometimes you watch another work by a director and you're like, that's not anything like the other one that I liked, and that's really dissatisfying. And then sometimes people follow actors. Like actors are the face of the movie. So you might be like, I like this actor in this movie, and then you go watch something else that they're in and it's terrible, and that doesn't work.
Or whatever the Netflix algorithm is that chooses something for you, and it's like, no, I've seen. Oh, I love it when it's like, you might like this. I was like, no, I've seen that. That's junk.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and to go a step further, even like genre, which Netflix tries to do. If you just lump movies by genre, oh, you like this horror movie? Well, maybe you'll like this other horror movie, even though those are maybe completely unrelated. And so for me, it's really unsatisfying to look at films in those ways. And I think maybe the better approach would be to take all of those and kind of mush them together into what I've referred to whenever I've talked about this idea with people as a film pedigree. So if you think about like racehorses or dog breeding, a pedigree, you trace the lineage of the breed, characteristics that you really like. And so you look at, okay, well, that came through, this horse way back when. They were a prize race horse. Oh, that combined with this one who was really good at like sprinting. And you're able through this process of looking at the trickle down of influences and then the trickle onward from this generation into the future of influences. I feel like you get a sense, and again, like somebody who gambles on horse racing or dog racing or something like that, like that's what they're using it for. They're using it to identify what's going to be good now based on what was good before. And so I feel like if we could look at films as a big family tree almost, where we look at, okay, what is a film that I love? Okay, well, what are films that influence the film that I love? I probably will like those. Or what are films that maybe have some of the same people working in them? Because that's an even more direct connection in this sort of family tree idea. Obviously, if the same person is working on one film and working on another film, that's going to be a line of connection. There's going to be some similarity there because of that person. Same thing's true of studio. Films made by the same studio may have some kind of through line or connection. Also, films that have, even are made from like a certain place or in a certain time, like there could be those types of things. Those are going to have through lines of connection. And then influence. if you like a film and you like its influences, you may like those films that influenced it. And then, again, if we took this idea and we were really able to expand it, you trace an influence back and you see, oh, hey, I actually like the film that influenced this film. What other films were influenced by that film? And you look at those, and now you've sort of got this tree of like, oh, these are all cousin films to each other. Mm-hmm. And so for this to be the most influential sci-fi film in history, for the film family tree of science fiction, this is the root. This is the source. This is the trunk of the tree. And so you can actually, if you like this film, then inevitably you're going to be liking some of the things that have grown out of it. And I would say, as we talk, I would love to kind of discuss some of those things, some influences that have come out of this. And as you look at the films that maybe we talk about and you realize, oh, wait, I like that, you might actually like Metropolis, or you might like one of the other things that have been influenced by Metropolis. I think that is a better way to view recommending and talking and discussing films as a whole than just, tearing off like one little piece of that and saying, okay, well, this is what I'm going to look at. As an example, I think whenever I was pitching this idea to you, Nick, I shared that to me, there are two films that are brother and sister. Now, I'm sure there are others that fit this. Home Alone 1 and Home Alone 2. Now, some people might say those are the same movie. That's because...
It's not a bad argument.
It's not a bad argument. That's because in this idea of film family trees, if you look at the people who were involved in the first Home Alone and the people who were involved in the second Home Alone, they're largely the same people. And so they're drawing on the same influences, and you've got the same writer, you've got the same cast, you've got the same crew largely. And so those two films are so similar. Now, I don't know a lot of people who are like, oh, I love one and hate the other one. Usually you kind of have about the same feeling for both films.
Yeah.
And it's because they are similar. The Back to the Future films actually are probably another fair example of that, where those films carried over a lot of the same elements.
Those films feel like one movie. They just continue on right into the next one. It feels like just one giant movie right there.
And so those would be in my film pedigree. Those are sibling films. And so take that out, and we're going to look at the nieces and nephews and aunts and uncles and cousins on the film family tree that is Metropolis.
Cool.
So
when you were talking about that, it made me think of, there's one of the most beloved times. Currently, right now, we have a lot of nostalgia and love for 80s filmmaking. Mm-hmm. All the films that came out in that time. And if you think about during that time, there was this new kind of collaborate in the 70s and into the 80s. There's this new collaboration between filmmakers that started happening. When I think of like Spielberg and Lucas and
Coppola
and Scorsese, they were all like hanging out together and bouncing ideas off of each other and sharpening each other's skills, and would bring an idea and they would tear it to shreds or something, if they're talking together. And I mean, those are your giants now that we all look at and are like, those are the great American filmmakers of the time and even continuing into today. Yep. And it's like, it's not coincidence that they were all hanging out together during the times where they started putting forth really good art.
Yeah, they had really strong influence on one another. I would also say that as you look at films, we all have different things that we like. I'm definitely more into visuals than a lot of people that I know. And so I've learned there are certain factors that in a film that aren't going to carry over. But if I can identify who a cinematographer is, and I really like their work on this film, if they worked on another film, I'm probably also going to like that film and like what it does. Certain actors I've found, if you can kind of get in the head of what the actor's looking for in a role, then it gives you the ability to know, or there are certain actors you can count on doing a certain type of work, and you can enjoy it because they're going to bring their sensibility to it.
Yeah, that person doesn't usually just go for the paycheck. They're usually very intentional about what they're choosing, and so if I've liked these that they've put out, most likely I'm gonna like that one. You trust what they're gonna choose.
So let's go ahead and dive into Metropolis. First, before we just start at Metropolis and move forward, Metropolis doesn't live in a vacuum. it was influenced by other things. So what's something that maybe you saw that influenced the creation of Metropolis?
Well, what you talked about earlier, 1927, this is post World War I, and we had talked about in our Children of Men pod a couple of weeks back that dystopian literature and film had its boom after the dystopian literature and utopian as well had its time in the century before and had come into this century, but especially after World War I, you started seeing things like We and a lot of other dystopian titles in both literature and in film start popping up. And so this is coming right at that time. And it's drawing, but, dystopian literature had been around, and so it was drawing from things that had come before. And when I was watching it the other night and thinking about the film, because it's set up like a utopia, the bright city above is beautiful, everything's fine, we have luxury cars and we just run on the track all day and have beautiful gardens. It's set up to be very beautiful. Then there's the stark contrast of the city below that's just utilitarian, everything's flat, boring, terrible housing where these people live. And so that idea, it got me thinking of H.G. Wells, because I had just finished, a couple months back, had read the Time Machine and had watched the Time Machine movie from the 2000s, not the classic one, but the newer one. And it got me thinking of, in the book, the time traveler speculates on what happened to the world. And because you have the Eloi and the who's the other bad guys? Oh, the Morlocks in the movie, and the Morlocks are below, and the Eloi are on the surface. And the time traveler in the book thinks that what happened at the collapse of humanity and the separating of species, that the people above got lax because they had everything that they wanted, and they turned into the Eloi, who were dumb and carefree and just enjoyed the world but weren't very smart. And then you had the Morlocks, who are a bit smarter, but they had lived below and their eyes had gotten huge and they got accustomed to the dark, but they were also very mechanical. And it's funny to me because it was almost like this movie could be a prequel to the Time Machine.
It happens in that span of time between
it happens in that time that
when he travels and where he arrives.
But where he ends up afterward. I was like, you could make the argument that this is that future past that
I'm gonna believe that now. That's where it is for
that's
me
where
now.
my mind went. I was like, because there's that upper level, it's the upper class, lower class that's shown in underground, above ground. That's an easy way to show it. And so that idea that was in that book, I'm sure played into this, and it made me think, oh, that would be funny if you could put it in universe and say, oh, that's it.
That's funny, yeah.
And the people who are below in Metropolis are the mechanics, are the people who are doing,
When was the Time Machine? When did it come out?
What year the book?
Is it late 1800s?
Yes, yeah. But
so there would have been time for that idea even to percolate.
Yeah, and he had several books like The Sleeper Awakes, and specifically one I'll talk about. What was another one? Oh, it's in this quote. I have a quote from H.G. Wells. So the funny thing is I was thinking about the Time Machine, and so I got on Google and I was searching. I just typed in H.G. Wells Metropolis to see if my thinking anyone else had thought, or if there was connection to his literature. And what I found was really fun and interesting, because H.G. Wells was not a fan of this film at all. He he despised this film.
Wow.
Hated it when he saw it. Now, my thinking was, I don't know if he was in America when he saw it or if he was in Britain at the time, but most likely
probably saw an edited
He
version.
probably saw the 90-minute edited down cut. And so I had to keep that in mind. But I found his review online, his entire review, which is very lengthy. and it's on Wired.com because I was finding quotes here and there, and I was like, that's hilarious. And I was like, I want to read this whole thing. And so I condensed it down, but I have got to read this quote. He sent this review into the New York Times in 1927. Wow. So this was, and H.G. Wells by this time is very well known. People know him as like a future historian, big science fiction guy. Yeah. Sold a ton of books, and so he's well known. And so he sends in his critique of Metropolis to the New York Times, and it's published, and it is hilarious. I got to read some. So it starts with, I've recently seen the silliest film. I do not believe it would be possible to make one sillier.
He opened with silly.
This is his first line. I have recently seen the silliest film. It is called Metropolis. It comes from the great UFA studios in Germany, and the public is given to understand that it has been produced at enormous cost. Well, that is true. Mm-hmm. It gives one edifying concentration almost every possible foolishness, cliche, platitude, and muddlement about mechanical progress, and progress in general served up with a sauce of sentimentality that it's all its own. Possibly, and I'm skipping around because this is a long review, but the whole thing is glorious. Possibly, I dislike this soupy whirlpool of nothingness because I find decaying fragments of my own juvenile work of 30 years ago, The Sleeper Awakes, floating about in it. He's straight up.
So he's like, hey, you drew on my influences, not well.
He's straight up is saying you're plagiarizing my work from 30 years ago. I don't. How do you say? Is it Kepek?
Capek? Oh,
the Czech
robot? Yeah. RUR?
Yeah, so Capek's robots have been lifted without apology, and that soulless mechanical monster of Mary Shelley's, who has fathered so many German inventions, breeds once more in this confusion. Originality, there is none. Independent thought, none. Where nobody has imagined for them, the authors have simply fallen back on contemporary things. The aeroplanes that wander above this great city show no evidence of contemporary types, though all that stuff could have been livened up immensely with a few helicopters or vertical or unexpected movements. The motor cars are 1926 models or earlier. I don't think there was a single new idea, a single instance of artistic creation, or even intelligent anticipation from first to last in the whole pretentious stew. I may have missed some point of novelty, but I doubt it.
Wow.
Oh man, and that's only a part of it. He goes into specifics and specifically the story, which again, he probably got an edited copy of it, but he just tears this thing apart, and he's so catty through the whole thing.
That makes me wish he were on Reddit.
Yeah, it feels like I may end up posting this for our listeners to read because it is thinking about if this review came out on a movie today, it would go, it would be shared like crazy because it's hilarious. He's so catty and he's so like I think he's a little angry that his and other people's ideas were taken and put in this work that he feels is not good up to sci-fi standard. Yeah. Wow. And yeah, he seems a bit hurt and and he's just so, his wording is great in here. But he says that this future has no advancements, that people are silly, that the story makes no sense, and that there's plagiarism from himself, Shelley, and Capek.
Yeah. The RUR comparison. I actually was surprised that this film doesn't use the word robot in it. That's the biggest surprise to me.
Well, because when I saw that, because that was the first time robot was used, and they go out of their way to say machine man in this movie, or maybe I'm thinking they go out of their way to say machine man, because I thought that was interesting after I read this review of, were they actually trying not to say that because they didn't want to think people to think that? Yeah, it makes me
wonder if that original Czech play was, whenever it was translated to German or presented in German, if they used machine man or something like that.
It could be.
If they translated that word, but it's hard to say.
Because robot comes from their word for
slave.
Yeah, and so it may not translate
Yeah.
correctly or
So
in an effective
it
way.
definitely it's weird that this movie doesn't just call the machine man a robot.
Right.
Because and I even had to look that up. I'm like, this must have come before that play came, and I'm like, nope, sure enough, not it. This is well after it had time to have percolated. So.
Right. Well, and the director.
Long.
Yeah, Long. He
Lang.
before Long Lang, before he made Metropolis, he visited America and specifically New York, and he was mesmerized by New York and the tall buildings and the lights that came on at night, and it was beautiful to him. Of course, there was no other city like it at the time. It was the metropolis of its time, and so a lot of that influenced the look of it. And so in Wells's review, he straight up calls him on it that he's like, this is not a city of the future, it's New York. He's like, what you've done is you've made the buildings that we have now but taller. and he's like, which it doesn't even make sense because like he got into the weeds of people spread out before going that tall. Like it's a scientific fact of people go out and spread before making something that tall. Which, I mean, of course, there's crazy tall towers today, but yeah. He tears into this, and of course, like the biplanes, and he's like, there should be helicopters, and all the automobiles are from the days that you made this movie, and so which is funny too, because talking about what this influenced. So this came out in 1927. In 1933 is when Wells wrote and published his book, The Shape of Things to Come. And then in 1936, so he wrote it in 1933. In 1936, he adapted it to the screen with Things to Come, and he was the screenplay writer for it. And I was like, oh, maybe this is good too. I want to see it. And so I watched a trailer of it, and there's a helicopter.
There you go.
And so it got me thinking, I'm like, how much of this book and this movie was his angry response to Metropolis?
So that's it. It almost influenced in the backwards way. It's reacting against something.
Yeah, because the Shape of Things to Come is straight up his view of the future, and I feel like he didn't write that, on an island in a bottle. Like I feel like there is some of Metropolis and him bucking against it in those pieces. So I thought that was funny.
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest influences that clearly informs this is the Weimar period of filmmaking in Germany, and specifically a work called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. This film a lot of times is described as the pinnacle of German expressionism. And that's this period of German filmmaking that was kicked off by what was at the time a low-budget film, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, where you create your sets, your mise en scène, everything that's on screen. So props, characters' costumes, sets, all of those things. You are creating those things to express ideas, subjective ideas. So if you want something to seem depressing, you make it dark and grab and gray and give it hard lines. And then if you want something to be happy, you make it brighter and you make it more fluid and those types of things. And so this film definitely they were made in the same place, now not by the same studio. Obviously, Metropolis is made by UFA, and Caligari was one of the few films. Now, the Weimar period, Germany basically consolidated all of its filmmaking under UFA. So Caligari was kind of this weird outlier of a film, but it was super influential. And even the actor who plays Rotwang in this film played Dr. Caligari, like the titular character in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. So
is he an evil scientist in that as well?
Basically.
He's got a type.
Yeah. So there definitely had to be influence from that film into this one. And I would say if you like Metropolis, especially visually, the ways that the worker city seems very depressing, and the way that the city in the sky looks very jubilant. Those types of ideas, and even in like the makeup effects that were used to express, because you could tell Maria from Robot apart because they did that really dark
eyeliner.
shading on the eyes and things like that. Yeah. So if you like
Let's talk about influence, how like that has trickled down into so many things.
Totally.
Just throw some dark eyeliner on him, and that's the evil version.
So I would say that film, Caligari, definitely had influence on this one. So it would, if I were creating a family tree for Metropolis, one of the lines of influence would be to Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Yeah, they definitely do the light, dark, huge, whatever setting
now, I will say,
is happening is what they're going for.
Metropolis is subdued compared to Caligari.
I
love
really?
Caligari because it is bonkers. So it's largely, the film is meant to communicate this idea of madness that the main character has. And so the sets are designed on all these weird angles, and you've got to see.
Interesting.
If you want to expand your repertoire of silent films, check out Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Interesting.
So what about works? So we've looked at a couple that influenced this work. What works did Metropolis influence that you saw?
Well, the big thing that I enjoyed about this movie was the visuals. I said that earlier, that it's masterful in what it created. I mean, it spent its money on the beautiful sets and establishing just these crazy, brilliant shots. And when it first started, and I saw the scale of the sets in this movie, I was dumbfounded at first because at first I'm thinking miniatures. I immediately think, it's everything is a facade, and you have to, a lot of times to get scale, when in later movies, when you wanted to get scale, you made a miniature. But so many of these shots that my immediate thought would be, oh, that's, tiny. It's a few inches high. Then you see people standing on the platforms, especially like the machinery underneath, or
the Moloch machine. Does that? Yeah.
Yeah, the Moloch
where
machine.
Stories high.
Yes, and you see the guys at the panels at every level. And then there's another room that kind of looks like an electromagnet room that's different from that one, where you see the depth of it because there's guys close by and then far away, and if every other scene you get to Fredersen's office and how huge it is, every scene other than Rotving's house is massive and incredibly detailed. And it just blew my mind that they made something so big for this. And that, of course, people going big and making things visually impressive and stunning, people have drawn from that. The two that come to mind immediately for me are Star Wars and 2001: A Space Odyssey, which Star Wars was influenced by 2001, but both I feel owe a lot to this for it going all out. With 2001, you have, before even the sets, I love the video call that talk about, Wells says that there wasn't anything imaginative in it, but at one point, Fredersen has a video call with his foreman guy, and I was like, oh, and it's funny because it's right next to a ticker tape machine.
Yep.
And then he's got a video chat, and I was like, oh man, I didn't expect that. That's awesome. That's really forward thinking. Yep. And that same thing is at the beginning of the space portion of 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah, sure is. And it still was ahead of its time whenever it existed at that time.
Right. Yeah. Even then, it was like, oh, crazy, the future. We'll talk to each other, via screen. And to think that this was present in a 1927 film, that blew my mind when I saw that, because I had always thought of it with 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I was like, that's super cool. So many crazy, like 50 years before. Well, not quite, but yeah, that blew my mind. And so there's that. But as far as just the scope I mean, 2001 is known for it does a lot of miniatures, but it visually is so striking with how detailed and how big they seem, especially like the moon when the ship is landing on the moon. Like that whole sequence is incredible. There's plenty of the spaceship that the astronauts are on with its circular motion, and all the details on it are incredible. And I feel like that drew specifically from that. I also like in this movie, there's a lot of slow visuals that are because it's silent. It's heavily dependent on the music played with it, but the music with the shots in Metropolis is beautiful. I don't know who did the score for it, but it's brilliant. It's bombastic where it needs to be. It's triumphant where it needs to be, and it's unsettling where it needs to be. The music is just so on point for the visuals that are shown in Metropolis. And the same thing is true of 2001. Its score is iconic, and it fits so much with the spectacle that you're seeing on screen. And so I feel like those were very similar. And of course, there's the fear in 2001. There's the fear of technology, of this HAL 9000 and what is its true intent and purpose. And of course, that was in this beginning sci-fi film with Maria.
Oh, totally.
Very present there. And then there's Star Wars, which, of course, is another... George Lucas famously said that he wanted to make a movie like Stanley Kubrick's 2001, but faster. Like he said that to Ron Howard on the set of American Graffiti. He's like, yeah, it'll be like 2001, but, kind of like a Western and faster. Yeah.
Well, there you go.
And so he was taking, influence obviously from Kubrick, but also it going back to just George's visually minded. He's very focused on how it looks.
Yeah,
and
George was a film school brat too, and I feel like that group were aware of a lot of films that I think even people at their time would not have been. And they saw Metropolis. Now I'm sure they saw the edited cut, but they saw Metropolis.
Yeah. Oh, George was a super nerd.
Yeah.
I just listened to some audio of Ron Howard's brother. What's his name? He actually went in for Star Wars. Clint Howard. So Clint Howard back during the original Star Wars days went in for a role in Star Wars and met George to do some lines or whatever. And he said that George swiveled around in the chair, and the first thing he said to him was he called him by his name from the Star Trek episode when he was a kid.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And he was like the master. What was that episode?
Yeah, the Corbomite maneuver.
Yes. And that's... And he talked to him about that as the first thing. And Clint Howard was like, get a life. So I guarantee, George is a super nerd back then. I guarantee he knew this film and definitely had appreciation for it because of, he loves art. He is opening his art museum very soon. And so the focus on the visuals. George hired Ralph McQuarrie to do all of the concept art and the concept art and matte paintings. There's matte paintings in this movie that give you the scope of a huge city in 2001. Same thing. They use the same techniques in Star Wars of making you believe things are deeper and bigger and than what they really are, but they look so real that the scale works. And of course C-3PO, like Ralph McQuarrie, whenever he was doing concept art for Star Wars very early on, he needed two androids, and one of them was supposed to be like a man. So the early versions you see of C-3PO look a lot like Maria or Hel, the android. And it looks very similar. And so I think that was definitely on the minds of the creators for Star Wars as well.
Yeah. In that, the influence of even just the robot on sci-fi designs, one of the big lines that I would trace from this film to sci-fi of the last 100 years is that the future is Art Deco.
Yeah.
I was looking at it. Now, there were some other, there are definitely other works that continued this influence, and you couldn't say it's exclusively this, but the design work in this film is extremely, extremely Art Deco, and you see that within the next decade or so after this film came out, you've got a lot of the like sci-fi pulp magazines that all of their covers are extremely Art Deco. And that continues then through the 50s and the 60s, and even design work that was done for real objects, cars from the 50s that are meant to look futuristic. They start putting fins and things on them that don't make any design sense, but
Right.
but they're definitely a reference to that design aesthetic that's present in this work. And so anytime you see a work that has an Art Deco future, it whether through direct influence or through indirect influence, because of all the other works that have been influenced by this, is definitely drawing influence from Metropolis.
Well, it's funny too because the name Metropolis is the city where Superman,
Which was taken from...
right,
Yeah.
which is where he lives. And if you look
Yeah.
at when those are illustrated, they are very Art Deco. Anytime you see the big landscape shots of Superman City, it looks very shiny and Art Deco, which is also funny too because on the flip side of that, you have Gotham, which is very gothic, of course, and it's in the name itself, but which is funny too because it's also in this film as well. There's the Art Deco shiny side, but then you have Rutvang's house, and then you have the
The underside,
Catacomb-
the worker city. Oh, the catacombs, yeah.
yeah, you have the catacombs, and then you have the church where the 7 sins are, and
Yeah.
then where the final battle between him and Freder is on the roof.
Yeah.
And then that has stuck. And that was even in Burton's film. It was very
Well, and
gothic-like.
He has referenced Metropolis as an influence.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Even though it's supposed to be, it's shown as a huge, massive scale, futuristic city, it still looks very gothic. Another big one that's focused on the city is Blade Runner. Blade Runner's futuristic city is very much taken from. There's a building in Blade Runner that straight up looks like the new Tower of Babel. Have you ever noticed that in there?
Yeah, is
When-
it where he comes in for a landing?
Yes,
on the roof
in
of
the car. Yeah, after
Looks
this,
like the new Tower of Babel. Yeah, it
exactly
totally
after
does.
he's flown through the city and he's coming down. It straight up looks like that, and I think it was intentionally placed in there to get that idea. But the idea of this mega city that everything has eventually just gone straight up and all the towers are massive and there's all of this sky traffic around very much looks like those shots from Metropolis where you have all of the all of these are all flying cars.
Yeah.
But in Metropolis you had the
Elevated highways,
elevated
yeah.
highways going in and out of buildings, and straight up is taken from there, and a lot of people see that it's very distinguished in that way.
Yeah, well, and Star Wars you've already referenced, but Coruscant draws on that same influence.
It's like taking Blade Runner's city and shining it up to make it look back like more like Metropolis. Yeah, and it also has Art Deco. I think when you think of Padme and Anakin's apartment, super Art Deco looking from the outside, and cars around there as well.
Yeah.
They pull influences into the vehicles on Coruscant as well. But yeah, another cool thing I thought about with Blade Runner is even though you have the shining city in Metropolis, there is also the Gothic that is injected in there. And I thought it was kind of in Blade Runner, you get the noir aesthetic injected, even though it's the city of the future. You still have, the blinds and and the papers and the rain and kind of the smoky dinginess of an old noir. And so you have that.
If you ran those two things into each other, like the influence of noir films, if the Maltese Falcon and Metropolis had a baby,
right?
it would
Exactly.
be Blade Runner.
exactly. And so I was like, oh, it's cool that they both took those, like, even though this is in Metropolis, a shining city, he also injected that gothic flavor in there, almost as a an extra bit or something that is not conflicting, but a little perpendicular to what else is there. And then the same thing in Blade Runner, because you wouldn't think of papers like that existing in the future.
Yeah.
There's some things that are a throwback that you wouldn't expect. And of course, in Blade Runner, there is the replicants, the idea of AI robots being indistinguishable from humans. That was the whole idea with Maria in this film. And then you have the stark class differences that the replicants in Blade Runner are created in order to serve on those moon or planet colonies that are off-world. And of course, they revolt, and then they're all taken out. And so that's almost like the plan worked that was instituted in Metropolis. And then it's also very heady and philosophical, Blade Runner is, which it was taking a lot of influence from 2001, but Metropolis is also very much focused on philosophy, on the getting to the truth and really hammering that home. And so Blade Runner 2001, these are dealing with heavy concepts and what we do with them.
Which I wonder if that doesn't even run backwards some too, where the first work of science fiction, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is a super philosophical work too.
Absolutely. If you have the power to do something, should you? And yeah. So and the same thing with Metropolis is Fredersen has the power to subjugate all these people and not care for them and make a profit and make the city work. But should he do that, or should he have more care and compassion and work with them? Yeah,
and it's actually really interesting. One of the last ones that I would like to talk about, or points of influence, is that so Frankenstein begins this trend of a lot of things in science fiction, and a lot of those things are picked up in Metropolis. You have the mad scientist, you have a fabricated human being, and things that Wells picked up on. You have philosophy, that sci-fi is generally a philosophical medium. This film, Metropolis, actually comes to influence
the monster universe.
Dracula, Frankenstein, The Mummy, some of these films. And one that gets referenced a lot is Frankenstein. So it's interesting that you have Frankenstein influences Metropolis, influences Frankenstein. And so when James Whale, the director of Frankenstein, was working on the film, he actually had this film, as well as a couple of others, screened because he wanted to draw on the visual style that's present in this film, because it is German expressionism. And so if you look at Frankenstein, the film, there is a lot of German expressionism in influence in the design. And then it goes even a step further. There are points where, especially when Dr. Frankenstein is animating the monster in Frankenstein, that is the same sequence as Maria, the robot machine man becoming Maria, with all of the dials and diodes and electricity and flashes of light and all of that
which
stuff.
That has been done and done and done again through, even into like cartoons. And
often though that's a reference to Frankenstein, but Frankenstein was influenced by Metropolis.
Well, see, and I didn't I saw the similarities in that scene, but I of course thought the same thing of that is all going back to the aesthetic started by Frankenstein, is the bubbling vials, that are overflowing, and the tubes that are zigzagging all over the place, and a giant lever on the wall with electricity and glass jars that you don't know what these chemicals are.
Bubbling up and
but and you think of Frankenstein and that, but this came before. And so that would be my question, is because I always think Frankenstein, well, this came before. Did anything come before this, or is this the one?
Arguably the trope codifier for that.
Yeah.
In cinema. There could be some other cases, but definitely nothing that would have had as broad an influence as Metropolis.
Right.
So it definitely did that. Now, again, as I said, a lot of people have already pointed that out. Like, this is very common knowledge. In my model of film family trees, though, I found one that was even more interesting to me.
Okay.
This completely blew my mind with the Universal Monster universe. Carl Freund, who was one of this film had 3 cinematographers. Metropolis had 3 cinematographers, and Carl Freund was one of them, who evidently, like Fritz Lang, was a transplant to Hollywood, moved to the United States.
Fled Germany.
He was the cinematographer for Dracula and went on to be the director of the Boris Karloff Mummy from 1932. So 31 and 32. He was also working in the Universal monster movie mix. And so that, to me, direct through line. So those movies have that really, and especially it makes me wonder how many of the gothic scenes in Metropolis, how many of those did Freund work on?
That's interesting.
Go on to work on these other incredibly gothic films.
Oh, okay. And it's funny because they started with Frankenstein, wasn't that?
Nope. Frankenstein would have come late. Dracula was actually the first of the Universal.
Oh, really? It came before. Okay. Well, yeah, it's just funny because it's basically like, yeah, let's pull all that stuff. We like that aesthetic. We like what you did with that movie. Bring that aesthetic into these movies, into this horror. Because once again, there's so many horror aspects in Metropolis. I was not expecting that part of it so much. But yeah. I wondered,
looking at the studio, so you asked me that question and I said really confidently, and then I was like, wait, should I have been as confident as I was? Those 2 films were released in the same year. Dracula came out earlier. It was a February release, where Frankenstein was a November release.
Oh, okay.
So they were right on top of each other.
Well, I mean, I feel that makes the case even stronger, that they were looking at, hey, let's get this guy and these ideas off of Metropolis and bring those in and make this very gothic and creepy and scary.
And even expressionistic. If you look at, I feel like there are some films, I think there is an American expressionism in filmmaking that doesn't often get highlighted because it wasn't as consistent a movement as German expressionism was. And German expressionism was really, really overt. Whereas I think American expressionism would include films like the Universal movies. Also, I would say like The Wizard of Oz is another example of a very expressionistic film where the visuals are meant to communicate ideas. And so when you go to the witch who's creepy and bad, it's super gothic. When you're, going through
the hopeful city of Emerald is kind of futuristic and polished and sleek. Yeah.
So, but there is a definite through line from Metropolis to the Universal horror movies. It's undeniably a close family connection.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah. Well, Nick, it's been good talking with you about Metropolis. What have you been into lately besides watching this film?
Yeah, I mean, I got a much bigger appreciation for that through finally watching it and looking up stuff on it and having this discussion. So I've enjoyed that more than I thought it was. Another big thing I've been watching lately is Firefly. I went back last time several years ago. I first watched it in college, and then a few years after that I came back and did a rewatch, and now it's been a good 5 or 6 years since I did that watch, and so I was like, I want to watch these again. Is it as good as I thought it was? Because with age, things can change. You change, and then a property with its age, does it still sit well? And I watched it again, and it's great. Firefly is such a great show. It was canceled too soon, and we're gonna have a show on it next podcast. We're gonna talk specifically about Firefly and the space western genre. Yeah, we're gonna talk about a little bit about our favorite ones. But I finished watching. It's 13 episodes before it got canceled. Super short season, and then there was a movie, Serenity tie-up, which I haven't gotten to sit down and watch it
Serenity
yet.
always feels to me like it's it is suggesting where the show would have gone if it had
Right.
had like another season or two.
Right.
That's the impression that I always get whenever I watch that. It's like this is a movie-length teaser for what you would have gotten if the show had continued.
Right. And they had set up things that he clearly was like, well, I have to pay him off here.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Reavers, that whole storyline, that those were everything that we got in the original series was a lot of setup. They were going to be that series Borg, basically.
Oh, sure, yeah. Well, and the plot that gets revealed about them in Serenity.
Right, tying back to the core of the story.
Yeah, I think that would have been.
Yes.
That was.
It would have been
like a season or two that would have.
It would have been a great reveal
off.
over time, and it probably would have made for a great, like, cliffhanger or leading into another season of what does that mean? How's that going to change the show? So terrible that it got canceled.
Yeah.
But what you do get is great.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, I'm laughing. I'm laughing out loud again. The banter between them is so great.
Oh yeah.
My favorite line in the whole show is I love Jane.
Well, yeah.
Jane is my favorite character on the show. And my favorite line of his, maybe I should say this for next time, but I'm
It's
just
too late now.
It's too late now. I'm going to say it. I love. He's like, "Do you know what the chain of command is?" He's like, "That's a chain I go get and beat you with until you learn who's in charge." And I was like folding laundry and watching it, and I just started dying laughing. I was like, "That is hilarious!"
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I've already watched this, but I'm laughing again and having a great time because it's a fun show.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to talk about it in the context of westerns because I am a huge fan of the western genre. I'm a little sad that it has basically died. I mean, every few years you'll get a western that will get some appeal and people will go see, but generally that the genre has really just
and when those come out they struggle. Like they don't get. There was one with Christian Bale last year, Hostiles,
something like that,
I think, and I watched a review on it and they were like, this is an incredible, it's a hard movie to watch, it's really deep, and it just came and went, didn't get a lot of
We'll talk
consideration.
about this some next week, but I actually wonder some if science fiction didn't play a little bit into the death of the Western.
Oh, yeah.
But like I said, we'll talk about that next week. And to wrap up, first off, I want to thank, we may have some new listeners who saw our recent ICCC, the Imperial Commissary Collectors Convention.
Yeah, we made a video for that and posted it, and we got some interesting comments and shares on that.
Yeah,
it was fun to make. And
so those of you who maybe we've picked up because we were at that event, thank you so much for playing along with our silly game and letting us blind you with JJ's mystery box. I feel like the laughter that we got was really great. It was a lot of fun to be at that event.
It was nice watching the video because I was like, oh, they're genuinely liking this. We weren't just annoying them.
Yeah. I love there's one guy who, as you grab the box and we're walking away from him, he's like, he was smiling and laughing, but with his hand he did this gesture like, get out of here. You're like, I love it. So anyway, thank you so much to those attendees, and thank you for your comments and for chiming in on that video. It's been fun to see some community grow around that. So really appreciate that. Remember that you can reach out to us. Nick, where can they find us at?
Yeah, we're at the Dead Padawan Society at gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube. You can subscribe and join in the conversation. Drop a comment. We are really good about answering back, and we'd love to connect with you there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening to us this week, and we'll be back in a couple weeks with an episode on Firefly.
We will see you next time. May the Force be with you.
And live long and prosper.